I was turned away right at the entrance of the hotel in Charleston, South Carolina, in front of flowers, cameras, and every guest dressed like they were stepping out of a magazine. The security guard didn't even blink when he blocked my path. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're not on the list." I showed him the invitation, the gold-trimmed card that used to mean something, and there it was, a thick red line slashed straight through my name. No mistake, no accident, no explanation. Just rejection written in ink, bold enough for anyone standing close to see. People glanced over their champagne glasses, pretending not to watch. Somewhere inside that hall, my little sister Olivia was about to marry the man she thought would keep her safe, and the family who erased me was already smiling for the cameras. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to the string quartet playing behind the walls, breathing in the scent of roses that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. No one said a word to me. Not a whisper of recognition. 7 years of silence carried right up to this doorway. So I turned around and walked away from the archway where the valet had already forgotten I existed. Down the driveway, past the fountain where we used to throw pennies when we were kids, past the hedges cut so neatly they looked like they could slice you if you brushed too close. When the sound of music had dulled into the hum of the city, I stopped beneath an oak tree and pulled my coat from my shoulders. It fell heavy against my arm. Underneath, 4 silver stars caught the late Carolina sun and sent it flashing back at the world that had once called me a disgrace. The uniform fit like a second skin, pressed perfect, boots polished to glass. I didn't come here to beg them to let me in. I came so that for one single moment they would have to look at what they threw away. And I wanted every last one of them to understand that I did not just survive without them. I became something they could never erase. 7 years ago, they called me a traitor. It started with a briefing room that smelled like old coffee and fear, a table full of brass who couldn't look me in the eye, and a folder that already had my name stamped guilty before I even opened my mouth. They said I had leaked classified intel. They said I'd sold my own unit out for money and politics. None of it was true, but truth doesn't make headlines. The trial that followed wasn't a trial. It was a stage. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting. Every word I spoke turned into a soundbite for people who already decided I was finished. My rank was stripped from me in front of the flag I had sworn to protect. And that silence when they pulled the pins off my shoulders was louder than any gunfire I'd ever heard in combat. I went home thinking at least my family would stand beside me. I thought wrong. I will never forget the press conference that came after. My mother, Linda Willow, stood in a navy suit, pearls around her neck, looking like the perfect picture of grace. She gripped the podium as if it could wash her hands clean of me. "Our family does not condone betrayal," she said, her voice calm, rehearsed, as if I wasn't her firstborn but a stranger in the street. Beside her, my sister Olivia sat on a morning talk show couch with fake tears glistening on her cheeks, shaking her head as if the very idea of speaking my name was poison. "She doesn't represent us anymore," Olivia whispered to a host who patted her hand in sympathy. Overnight, the country turned me into a headline, and my family turned me into a ghost. I stopped receiving calls. Friends stopped returning messages. The people I once led into danger looked away when they passed me in town. They wanted the shame to disappear, and so they acted like I had. That was the day I learned you can be erased while you're still breathing. They made sure the door closed behind me, and they locked it so tightly I could hear it in my sleep for years. I drove west until the road turned into nothing but sky and wind, until the radio lost its signal and the mountains started to feel like they were leaning in close enough to hear my thoughts. That's how I ended up in a town so small in Wyoming that no one bothered asking why I came. I rented a room above an auto shop with peeling paint and a sign that rattled in the wind. I paid cash, gave a false last name, and the man behind the counter didn't even blink. Days turned into months, and for the first time in years, no one saluted me. No one stared at me with suspicion. No one said my name like it was a curse. I worked long days under the hood of trucks, the smell of oil and metal sticking to my hands. At night, I'd fix motorcycles until my back ached. The grease was easier to wash away than the weight I carried. I didn't talk about where I came from, and no one asked. In a place like that, people respect silence. I made a routine out of disappearing. Wake up, work, sleep. I kept my hair tied back, wore plain clothes, let the Wyoming wind burn my face into someone unrecognizable. There were no mirrors in my room except for a cracked one above the sink, and I avoided it like a stranger. Once in a while, I'd stand at the window and look at the endless sky, and for a moment I could pretend that nothing existed beyond that horizon. No headlines, no betrayal, no family that had cut me out of their lives. Just the quiet hum of engines and the sound of my own breathing. It wasn't peace, not really. It was survival. Some nights I'd dream of the uniform I once wore, of the weight of the stars that had been ripped from my shoulders. But when morning came, I put my head down and let the world believe I was just another mechanic trying to get by. It was easier than trying to be someone worth remembering. I was bent over the frame of an old Dodge when I heard the sound of boots on concrete. Not the soft shuffle of a customer, but a steady, deliberate rhythm that pulled me straight out of the life I'd built to forget. I didn't look up at first. It had been years since I'd heard footsteps like that, and part of me thought I was imagining them, some ghost of the past coming to haunt me. But the shadow that fell across the garage floor didn't go away. I finally lifted my head, and there he was. Colonel Richard Holt, the man who had once pushed me harder than anyone else. The commander who had believed in me before the whole world decided not to. His hair was grayer now, his face carved with lines that looked like they had been earned the hard way. He just stood there for a moment, taking me in like he couldn't believe I was real. "You think this is it for you?" he asked finally, scanning the grease and the tools like they could explain the wreckage of my life. "Because they sure as hell act like you're already dead." I wiped my hands on a rag, unsure whether to laugh or tell him to leave. "I never believed what they said about you," he continued, his voice low and steady. Then he told me why he'd come. He was putting together something off the books, a covert group that answered directly to the Pentagon. No uniforms, no recognition, no official existence. The kind of missions that happen in places no one will ever talk about. "You want to stay buried, that's your choice," he said. "But if you want a way back, this is it." I stared at him for a long time, grease on my fingers, the smell of gasoline thick in the air, and something I thought was long dead flickered inside me. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even hope. It was purpose. I didn't give him an answer that day. But that night, lying awake in my small, silent room, I knew I couldn't stay invisible forever. And by morning, I knew exactly what I had to say. Syria was my first mission back, the kind of operation that didn't officially exist. No insignia, no backup, no flag, just a target on the map and a promise that no one else could make this extraction happen. The compound was buried in a stretch of desert that looked endless even through night vision goggles, and the air was so hot it felt like you could swallow it. We moved fast, silent, cutting through walls like ghosts until we found the cell. Inside was a man so thin he looked like his shadow had already left him. An American scientist, a defense contractor who had been captured months ago and left to rot. When I pulled the chains from his wrists, he could barely stand, but his eyes, sharp even under all that pain, locked onto mine. On the way out, as the world outside exploded with the chaos of our cover fire, he pressed something into my hand, a tiny USB drive hidden in the lining of his boot. "If I don't make it," he rasped, "this can't disappear." Back at base, after he was medevaced out, I sat alone in a steel room and opened the files. What I saw made my blood go cold. Documents, recordings, money transfers, threads connecting a private network of companies moving weapons and information across borders. And at the center of it all was a name I hadn't spoken out loud in years. Adam Caldwell, my sister's fiancé, the man the world called a tech visionary, a philanthropist, a rising star. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became that the scandal that destroyed me hadn't been a coincidence. It was engineered, paid for, and signed off by the same network that Caldwell Holdings controlled. Every accusation, every leak, every headline, they'd set me up so he could grow his empire clean while I burned. That night, I sat in the glow of that screen and understood, with a clarity I hadn't felt in 7 years, that everything I lost wasn't an accident. It was a choice someone made. And now I had proof. For the first time since I'd been erased, I felt something close to fire in my chest. After Syria, there was no time to breathe. Afghanistan came next. A raid on a hidden compound where they were building drones from stolen American blueprints. Then Yemen, intercepting a convoy of chemical weapons bound for rebels who would have leveled a city if we hadn't stopped them. After that, the United Arab Emirates, where the money behind half the chaos we'd been chasing finally showed its face. None of these missions would ever exist on paper. We wore no names, no ranks, just plain gear, and the knowledge that if we failed, no one would even admit we had been there. They called me Maverick, a word that didn't carry a past, a family, or a scandal. And in that world of shadows and unfinished maps, I found a version of myself that could finally move without the weight of the eyes that had once followed me everywhere. But the quiet never lasted. At night, after the debriefings and the cleaning of weapons and the silence of men and women who knew better than to ask, the old pictures came back. I'd lie on a narrow cot staring at the ceiling, hearing the sound of my own name the way it used to be said before it became poison. I thought of Olivia and how she used to sneak into my room as a kid, of the way she laughed when I taught her how to braid hair. I thought of my mother's face at that podium, the one moment I looked at her and realized she had already decided who I was without even asking me. Even as Maverick, even buried under layers of operations no one would ever know, there were moments I would see their faces as if they had been waiting for me in the dark. Every mission reminded me why I said yes to Holt that day in the garage. It wasn't redemption. It was the slow, patient hunt for the truth they had stolen from me. And with each step, each operation, each mile of desert and city and sea, I felt myself getting closer to the place where I would finally bring it all home. When the missions slowed enough for me to breathe, I started digging into my own past. Late at night in a locked operations room, with nothing but the blue glow of an encrypted terminal for company, I opened the old files the Army had written me out with. I read every report, every statement, every so-called piece of evidence that had been used to destroy my name. And the more I read, the louder the inconsistencies screamed back at me. Timelines didn't line up. Access logs were edited. Witness accounts sounded rehearsed. There was even a missing file from the night everything unraveled, a gap that no one had ever explained. Someone had rewritten my history and done it with a precision so clean that even I had started to believe it. I submitted a private request for an internal counterintelligence review, off the books. It felt like throwing a stone into the ocean, but a few weeks later, the ripples came back. Ryan Pierce walked into my office one afternoon, no warning, no escort. The last time I had seen him, he was just a young soldier, nervous and eager. Now he was a lieutenant, the kind of man who carried scars behind his eyes. Without a word, he closed the door, reached into his uniform, and pulled out a flash drive. "I kept this," he said. "Didn't know if it would matter, but I think now it does." The file he gave me was a recording. Grainy but clear. A voice I recognized immediately. Staff Sergeant Dean Vance, the same man whose mistake had been blamed on me. "I didn't have a choice," his voice cracked. "Caldwell Holdings paid me $200,000 to pin this on Willow. Said orders came from higher up. I just followed them." My hands went numb as the words filled the room. For years I had carried the weight of their lies alone. And here it was, proof that everything I had lost was because someone else bought my ruin. I played it 3 times before I could speak, and when I finally did, my voice sounded like steel. "This changes everything," I said, and I meant it. Holt called me into his office with a face I couldn't read. Years of missions had taught me to expect the worst, But when he slid the folder across the table, the words on the first page made me freeze. The charges that had hung around my neck for 7 years were officially nullified. Every stain, every accusation, every word that stripped me of who I was, erased. My rank was reinstated in full. At the bottom, typed in neat letters, was a title I thought I would never see again. General. For a moment I just stared at it, trying to understand how something so small, a piece of paper, could hold so much weight. Holt leaned forward. "It's over," he said. "Your name is clean." My hands shook, but not from relief, because I knew better. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. The same afternoon, while I was still sitting with that folder open on my lap, a courier delivered an envelope. Heavy paper, gold trim, fancy handwriting I recognized instantly. "Olivia and Adam request the honor of your presence." My eyes went straight to the line with my name, and there it was again. A thick slash of red ink, cutting me out like I didn't belong in my own bloodline. Underneath, a note in cursive. "No need to attend." It was meant to humiliate me, to remind me that no matter how far I'd come, I was still a ghost in their perfect little world. I set the invitation beside the document with my restored rank. The two pieces of paper so different they looked like they belonged to strangers. I could have ignored it, pretended none of it mattered. But deep down I knew this was the moment everything had been building toward. They wanted me invisible. They wanted me silent. But now I had my voice back, my name back, and something they didn't see coming. The truth. I folded the papers slowly, slid them into my jacket, and made a decision right there. If they wanted me absent, I was going to show up anyway. Not as their disgraced sister. As General Claire Willow. Charleston was heavy with summer heat the day I walked through the gates of the hotel. No coat this time. No attempt to hide. My uniform was pressed to perfection. Boots shining like glass. 4 silver stars catching the sunlight as if they had been waiting 7 years for this exact moment. The valet froze when I passed. The security guard at the entrance stepped aside without a word, and I could feel eyes on me before I even reached the courtyard. The wedding was already in motion. White roses everywhere. Strings of lights draped across manicured hedges. A string quartet playing something so delicate it didn't belong in the same world as me. Conversations stopped as I walked down the aisle between the guests. Glasses hovered mid-air. People whispered my name like it was a ghost story. And at the end of that aisle stood my family, frozen like statues. The picture-perfect image they had built on top of the ruins they left behind. I stopped in the center, letting them look, letting every star on my shoulders speak before I did. Olivia turned first, radiant in lace, her mouth falling open the second she saw me. Adam's hand tightened on her arm. My mother's face drained of color. "I came to bring a gift," I said evenly, pulling a small black USB drive from my pocket. The photographers stopped pretending to ignore me. They lifted their cameras as I held the drive up so everyone could see. "This holds recordings, financial records, everything that shows how Caldwell Holdings bought a scapegoat 7 years ago." "Me?" Adam's face went pale. Whispers rippled through the crowd, cell phones raised as if the world couldn't look away. I turned to Olivia. "I didn't come here to ruin your wedding. I came to take back what you all stole from me. My name. My life." Adam lunged forward, but I was already placing the drive into the hand of a man in a dark suit, an investigator who had been waiting for this moment. For the first time since the day they erased me, I stood in front of them whole, unbroken. And with every eye in the room watching, I finally gave them the truth they tried so hard to bury. The courtyard erupted the second the investigator opened the file on the drive. Screens lit up with lines of transactions, recordings of voices that couldn't be denied, the proof of every lie they'd built their lives on. People leaned forward, phones held high, recording as if their eyes couldn't believe what they were seeing. I stayed still, every muscle locked in control, while the room I had been shut out of for years turned into a storm. Adam tried to speak over the noise, his voice cracking as he shouted that it was all fake, that I was unstable, that this was some desperate attempt to ruin them. But every time he spoke, another file hit the screen. Money transfers, forged signatures, the confession of the sergeant who sold me out. I didn't have to say a word. The truth did the talking for me. The crowd closed in, whispering sharp as glass, cameras catching every twitch of his face as it all fell apart. Olivia's diamond veil shook against her hair as she tried to pull him away, but Adam couldn't stop himself. The man who had smiled for magazines and charity dinners came undone right there on the marble floor. He pointed at me, shouting, spitting out excuses so wild they barely made sense, and then he lunged. He didn't get far. Two plainclothes federal agents, who had been waiting for the signal, stepped out from the crowd and caught him before he touched me. The sound of handcuffs snapping shut was like a gunshot. Olivia screamed. Guests stumbled back, their perfect white dresses and tuxedos colliding in panic as the man they thought they knew was dragged through the garden past flowers and cameras and a life that was no longer his. Adam fought, twisted, begged, but no one was listening anymore. The cameras stayed on him all the way to the waiting SUV at the gate. When the doors slammed, a silence rolled through the courtyard so deep it made the air feel heavy. I stood there, steady, letting it all settle. The man who burned my life to the ground was finally being carried out, and this time I didn't look away. When the chaos drained from the courtyard and the last agent disappeared through the gate with Adam in custody, all that was left was the silence I had been waiting for. My mother stood stiff near the fountain, her perfect navy dress now as out of place as a costume, and Olivia was beside her with streaks of mascara running down her face, the white of her gown turned dull under the weight of what had just happened. I walked toward them slowly, boots echoing on the stone, until there was nothing but a few feet of air between us. Neither of them spoke. For a long time they just stared at me, as if hoping I would disappear like I had 7 years ago. I didn't. "I'm not here for an apology," I said, my voice even. "I don't need you to love me. I just need you to hear this. I survived everything you were afraid to face." My mother's hands trembled as she clutched her pearls. Olivia was the one who broke first. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I knew about all of it." The words fell like glass. When Adam showed us the files, when he told us what would happen if we defended you, I didn't stop him. I thought if we cut you out, it would protect us. It would protect me. She swallowed hard. I told myself it would all blow over. And when you disappeared, it just got easier. My mother closed her eyes. "I believed him," she said softly. "I thought burying you was the only way to keep the family's name clean." The sound of it didn't even sting anymore. It was just tired. I looked at them, both of them, and said, "You chose your reputation over me, and I need you to live with that." Olivia's tears came faster, but I didn't move to comfort her. "You never asked me if I did it. You just let them erase me," I said, "and that's something you can't take back." For the first time since I walked out of their lives, they had no words. And for the first time in years, I didn't need any from them. I turned away from them, from the wreckage of the perfect life they had tried to build on top of me, and walked back through the courtyard. The music was gone, the chatter gone, just 100 pairs of eyes following every step I took. My boots clicked against the marble until I reached the long stretch of stairs that led down to the street. The air smelled of trampled flowers and spilled champagne. I didn't look back. I had done what I came for. The truth was out, and I didn't need to stand there to watch what it did to them. I felt lighter with every step, like the weight of 7 years was peeling off my shoulders one layer at a time. I had no plan for what came next, only the sharp, clean knowledge that this chapter of my life was finished. I was almost at the gates when I heard a small voice behind me. "Excuse me?" I stopped and turned. A little girl, no more than 8, stood there in a pale dress, holding on to the edge of the stone pillar like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes were wide, but not afraid. "I saw you," she said softly. "I want to be like you when I grow up." For a moment, everything went quiet again. I crouched down so we were eye level and smiled just a little. "You be better," I told her. I reached up, unpinned one of the silver stars from my shoulder, and placed it in her small hand. It looked too big for her to hold, but she gripped it like a secret. "This isn't about who they think you are," I said. "It's about who you decide to be." She nodded solemnly, and I stood up again. Without another word, I walked out through the open gates, the warm Charleston air wrapping around me. For the first time in 7 years, I wasn't leaving like a shadow. I was walking out free, and I didn't need anyone to see me to know it. A week later, I sat in a hearing room deep inside the Pentagon, a place I once thought I'd never see again. The walls were bare, the kind of blank that forces you to face what's right in front of you. On the table sat a folder with my name stamped across it in heavy black ink, and when the officer at the head of the table opened it, the words came like a verdict I had been waiting years to hear. They read into the record that the charges against me had been formally and permanently dismissed, that the case against me had been based on falsified evidence orchestrated by outside actors, and that the United States government issued an apology for the damage done to my career, my name, and my life. I listened without moving, hands steady in my lap, because no apology in the world could undo what had already been lost. Still, hearing it said out loud was like unlocking a door I had been pounding on for years. They slid the papers toward me for my signature, but I didn't touch them yet. Then came the part I didn't expect. The man at the head of the table leaned forward and said, "General Willow, we want you to lead an initiative we're calling Operation Scorpion. It's a full-scale effort to root out corruption and interference from inside the system. We need someone who knows what it looks like when the system fails." I sat back, staring at him, my mind catching on those last words. They were asking me to come back, but not as the soldier they once threw away. They were asking me to come back on my own terms, to make sure no one else was ever erased the way I had been. For a long moment, I didn't answer. My life had been burned to the ground, and I had rebuilt it without them. But now, for the first time, I saw a path where I could turn all of that ruin into something sharp enough to cut the rot out from the inside. I signed the paper, not for them, but for me, for what comes next. Northern California smelled of salt and wind the day I drove out to the cliffs. The road curved like a ribbon above the Pacific, and when I stepped out of the Jeep, the roar of the waves below drowned out everything else. I carried a small wooden box with me to the edge, the kind that could fit in the palm of a hand, but heavy with what it held. Inside were the 4 stars I had worn on my shoulders that day in Charleston, the same ones I had earned back after years of being erased. I opened the lid and traced each one with my fingertips, feeling every mile, every scar, every battle they stood for. They weren't just rank. They were proof of what I had survived, of everything they couldn't take from me. The wind whipped at my hair as I held the box out, letting it stay open. One by one, the stars lifted and scattered like pieces of silver caught in the sky, until there was nothing left in the box but the quiet. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a secure line lighting up the screen with one short message. Operation Scorpion approved. Ready for lead command. I stared at it for a moment, the words blurring against the ocean light, then slid the phone back into my jacket. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I looked out over the water one last time, letting the horizon fill my chest until it felt like there was finally room to breathe. For the first time in 7 years, I wasn't walking into the future as someone defined by what had been done to me. I was walking into it as someone who chose who she was going to be. I turned back to the Jeep, the tires crunching on gravel as I climbed in and started the engine. The GPS blinked to life, the coordinates already loaded for the next chapter. I didn't look back at the ocean. I didn't need to. Everything that had chained me to the past had just been carried away by the wind. and I was driving towards something new.